The strongest hearts are rarely won by power. They are won by the one person who never tries to control them. No one inside Moretti's Italian restaurant dared to make eye contact with the little boy sitting alone beside the window. The lunch crowd filled the elegant dining room with quiet conversations, polished silverware, and the soft melody of a piano drifting through the air. Yet an invisible circle of silence surrounded 8-year-old Lucas Moretti, as if every customer instinctively understood they should stay away. Empty coloring books rested untouched beside his plate. A glass of apple juice sat exactly where it had been placed nearly an hour earlier. 3 child therapists had already visited him over the past month. 2 private tutors had resigned. Every nanny hired by the Moretti family eventually admitted defeat. Lucas never shouted. He never misbehaved. He simply withdrew into complete silence, speaking to no one after losing his mother 2 years earlier. Even his father could not reach him anymore. Across the restaurant, Vincent Moretti stood near the private dining room, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Men known throughout the city for their confidence lowered their voices whenever he entered a room, yet none of that authority mattered when he looked toward his son. Every expensive solution had failed. Every expert had offered another theory. Every hopeful promise had quietly disappeared. The only thing Vincent truly wanted in the world could not be purchased. He glanced at Lucas again, hoping for even the smallest sign that today might somehow be different, but the boy continued staring through the window, as though the entire world existed somewhere beyond the glass. Meanwhile, Danielle Brooks moved gracefully between tables carrying fresh coffee and warm bread with the calm rhythm of someone who genuinely loved caring for people. At 30 years old, she had learned that the smallest gestures often meant the most. She greeted elderly couples by name, remembered children's favorite desserts, and thanked every kitchen employee before the end of each shift. Most customers noticed only her warm smile. Few realized how carefully she observed the emotions hidden behind ordinary faces. As Danielle approached the service station, she noticed a stack of colorful paper left behind after a birthday celebration earlier that morning. She quietly folded one square into a tiny paper crane while waiting for fresh coffee to finish brewing. One of the younger waiters smiled. "You still make those?" Danielle returned the smile without looking up. Sometimes people need something simple more than something expensive. She slipped the finished crane into her apron pocket and continued serving guests. Several minutes later, she walked past Lucas's table without interrupting him. She did not ask whether he was hungry. She did not encourage him to smile. She did not pretend to understand his sadness. Instead, she quietly placed the small paper crane beside the untouched glass of apple juice and continued walking as though nothing unusual had happened. Lucas never lifted his head immediately. Danielle did not stop to see his reaction. She simply returned to helping another family across the dining room. Nearly a full minute passed before something almost impossible happened. Tiny fingers slowly reached toward the folded paper bird. Lucas picked it up, turned it carefully beneath the afternoon sunlight, and traced its folded wings with quiet curiosity. Vincent noticed the movement from across the restaurant. His heartbeat caught for the first time in months. Then, without anyone asking a single question, Lucas slowly stood from his chair, holding the little paper crane in both hands, and began walking toward the one waitress no one had imagined could change anything. Lucas stopped only a few feet away from Danielle, clutching the tiny paper crane with both hands as though it were something precious. The entire dining room seemed to hold its breath. Several servers quietly paused in the middle of carrying trays. A family near the fireplace exchanged puzzled glances. Even the restaurant manager looked toward Vincent, expecting him to intervene. Instead, the powerful businessman remained perfectly still, unwilling to risk breaking whatever invisible thread had formed between his son and the quiet waitress. Danielle slowly knelt until her eyes were level with Lucas, but she never reached toward him. She simply smiled with the same gentle warmth she offered every guest who walked through the restaurant doors. Lucas studied her face for several long seconds. Most adults became uncomfortable when silence lingered. Danielle did not. She understood that silence could be a language of its own. After another moment, Lucas carefully held the paper crane toward her. One small wing had become slightly bent. Danielle tilted her head with a soft smile. "It looks like he needs a little help," she said calmly, speaking to the paper bird instead of the little boy. Lucas watched every movement as she gently straightened the folded wing and returned the crane to his hands without touching him. She never asked his name. She never told him everything would be all right. She never demanded eye contact or a response. She simply respected the quiet space he had built around himself. For the first time in many months, Lucas looked directly into another person's eyes. It lasted only a second, but Vincent saw it from across the room. His expression remained composed, yet something inside him shifted. Danielle stood and quietly returned to her work as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She refilled coffee cups, delivered fresh pasta to a nearby table, and laughed softly when an elderly customer complimented the homemade bread. She never glanced back toward Lucas to see whether he was watching. She expected nothing in return for her kindness. That was exactly why it felt genuine. As the afternoon continued, Vincent found himself observing Danielle more closely than he had intended. She remembered a regular customer's favorite soup without asking. She noticed when a little girl accidentally dropped her spoon and quietly replaced it before anyone else reacted. She thanked the dishwasher as sincerely as she thanked the restaurant's wealthiest guests. There was no performance in her kindness. It was simply who she was. Finally, Lucas surprised everyone again. Still holding the paper crane, he slowly walked after Danielle as she crossed the dining room. He stopped beside the service station where she was folding clean napkins. Without speaking, he carefully placed the little paper bird beside her stack of linens, then looked up at her face. Danielle smiled again and quietly folded another square of colorful paper into a tiny turtle. She placed it beside the crane without saying a single unnecessary word. Lucas picked up both figures and hugged them gently against his chest before returning to his seat. No applause filled the restaurant. No dramatic celebration interrupted the moment. The miracle was far quieter than that. It lived inside the stunned expressions of people who had just witnessed hope appear where none had existed before. Standing near the private dining room, Vincent realized that every expert he had hired had tried to fix his son. Danielle had done something entirely different. She had simply made him feel safe. The following afternoon, Vincent arrived at the restaurant nearly 30 minutes before his scheduled meeting, something his staff had never seen him do before. He chose a quiet table near the back of the dining room where he could watch without drawing attention to himself. Lucas sat beside him, holding the little paper crane and paper turtle inside the pocket of his light blue sweater as though they were priceless treasures. For the first time in many months, the boy did not resist leaving the house. He quietly looked around the familiar dining room, almost as if searching for someone. Danielle was already working, greeting customers with the same gentle smile she had worn every day. Nothing about her behavior suggested she realized the owner of one of the most powerful families in the city was carefully observing her. She laughed softly with an elderly couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, patiently helped a nervous young father carry 2 high chairs to his table, and noticed a little girl struggling to color inside the lines. Without interrupting her work, Danielle folded another piece of colorful paper into a tiny butterfly and placed it beside the child's crayons. The little girl's eyes sparkled with delight. Danielle simply smiled and continued serving the next table. Vincent noticed a pattern. She treated every person with exactly the same quiet respect. Wealth did not impress her. Status did not intimidate her. Kindness was simply her natural language. When Lucas finally spotted Danielle walking across the room with a tray of fresh lemonade, he slowly stood from his chair without waiting for permission. Vincent instinctively started to rise, but stopped himself. Lucas took several careful steps until Danielle noticed him. She set the tray down before giving him her full attention. Once again, she did not ask questions. She did not encourage conversation. She simply smiled and waited. Lucas reached into his sweater pocket and carefully removed the paper crane. Then he placed it into Danielle's hands before gently pointing toward an empty table near the window. Danielle understood immediately. She carried 2 blank paper napkins and sat several feet away from him, leaving enough space for him to feel comfortable. Together they folded paper in peaceful silence while sunlight poured through the tall windows and painted soft golden reflections across the wooden floor. No words were necessary. Their quiet companionship spoke louder than any conversation. Customers nearby could not help smiling as they watched the little boy who had once hidden from the world, now choosing to remain close to another human being. Vincent felt emotions he had spent years burying beneath responsibility and discipline. He remembered countless evenings spent inside boardrooms and private offices believing he was building a better future for his family, only to realize he had slowly become a stranger inside his own home. As he watched Lucas carefully copy Danielle's patient hands, he began wondering whether healing had never required complicated answers at all. Perhaps his son had simply been waiting for someone willing to sit beside his silence instead of trying to erase it. Before leaving for another table, Danielle quietly slid a small stack of colorful paper toward Lucas with a warm smile. She never asked him to come back. She never suggested another meeting. Yet as Vincent gently took his son's hand to leave the restaurant, Lucas looked back over his shoulder one last time, smiling so faintly that most people would have missed it. Vincent did not miss it. In that almost invisible smile, he saw the first glimpse of the little boy he thought he had lost forever. Over the next several days, Vincent quietly adjusted his schedule without telling anyone the real reason. Important meetings were moved to later in the afternoon, business lunches suddenly took place at the restaurant, and every visit ended the same way. Lucas would slip a folded paper animal into his pocket before leaving home, and Danielle would always greet him with the same calm smile that carried no expectations and asked for nothing in return. She never treated him like a fragile child who needed to be fixed. She simply welcomed him into ordinary moments. One afternoon, she folded a paper sailboat while waiting for fresh bread to come out of the oven. Another day, she showed him how to make a paper fox with careful, patient movements, allowing him to discover each fold on his own. Sometimes they spent nearly 20 minutes together without exchanging a single word, yet the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. Vincent watched those quiet moments with growing amazement because every specialist he had hired had filled the room with instructions, exercises, and carefully planned techniques. Danielle offered none of those things. She simply offered her presence. The difference became impossible to ignore. Lucas began finishing his meals instead of pushing his plate away after only a few bites. He started looking out the restaurant windows with curiosity instead of emptiness. Once, he even paused beside the dessert display and pointed toward a slice of chocolate cake before shyly looking back at his father. Vincent immediately ordered 2 slices, not because of the cake itself, but because his son had made a choice. It was the first spontaneous decision Lucas had shared with anyone in a very long time. While Lucas quietly enjoyed dessert, Vincent noticed Danielle helping a new employee who appeared nervous during her first shift. Rather than correcting every mistake, Danielle calmly demonstrated each task with encouragement, thanking the young waitress whenever she learned something new. A few minutes later, she carried an extra bowl of warm soup to an elderly customer who mentioned feeling tired after spending the morning at a medical appointment. She did not announce her kindness or wait for praise. She simply noticed what people needed before they asked. That evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep during the drive home with the little paper fox resting in his lap, Vincent found himself unable to stop thinking about Danielle. He had spent years believing that influence came from authority, wealth, and certainty. Yet the woman earning an hourly wage inside his favorite restaurant possessed a quiet strength that no amount of money could purchase. She changed people without demanding anything from them. The following morning, curiosity finally overcame him. Instead of asking his security team to investigate, Vincent called the restaurant manager directly. He expected to hear an extraordinary story filled with impressive achievements. Instead, the manager laughed softly before saying, "Danielle has always been exactly like this. She notices people everyone else overlooks. She volunteers for extra shifts when someone has family problems. She brings homemade cookies for the kitchen staff during the holidays. She never talks about herself very much." Vincent remained silent for several seconds before asking one final question. Where did she learn to understand children so well? The manager hesitated for the first time. "I am not sure she would ever tell you herself," he answered gently. "But there is a reason she never gives up on a hurting child." Vincent slowly lowered the phone, realizing there was a story hidden behind Danielle's quiet smile. And somehow he already knew that understanding her past might also help him understand the miracle unfolding before his own eyes. The next afternoon, Vincent arrived earlier than usual, but this time he came alone. Lucas was spending the afternoon with his grandmother, giving Vincent an opportunity he had been quietly waiting for. He took his usual seat near the back of the restaurant and watched Danielle move through another busy lunch rush with effortless grace. She welcomed every customer with the same warmth, thanked every coworker who passed her, and somehow remembered dozens of small details that made each guest feel important. There was nothing dramatic about the way she treated people. It was simply consistent. When the dining room finally became quieter, Vincent approached the restaurant manager with a respectful smile. "Would you mind telling me more about Danielle?" he asked. The manager looked toward Danielle for a brief moment before nodding. "She would never tell you herself," he said softly. "She does not like attention." Vincent waited patiently. Several years ago, Danielle was studying early childhood education. Everyone believed she would become an exceptional teacher. Then her mother became seriously ill. Danielle left college only one semester before graduation because someone needed to stay home and care for her. Vincent listened without interrupting. She worked mornings at a grocery store, evenings here at the restaurant, and spent every free hour with her mother. Most people would have complained. Danielle never did. She always said that love was never a sacrifice when it was given freely. The manager smiled gently before continuing. After her mother passed away, many people encouraged Danielle to return to school. She said maybe one day she would, but first she wanted to rebuild her life one step at a time. Vincent remained silent as those words settled into his heart. Suddenly, every quiet moment he had witnessed made sense. Danielle understood patience because life had demanded it from her. She understood grief because she had carried it herself. She knew that healing could not be rushed because she had lived through the slow process of finding hope again. Later that afternoon, Lucas arrived with his grandmother and immediately looked around the dining room until he found Danielle arranging fresh flowers near the front entrance. His face brightened with the same small but unmistakable smile Vincent had begun to treasure. Danielle greeted him exactly as she always did, neither overly excited nor overly careful. She simply welcomed him into another ordinary afternoon. Together they folded colorful paper into little stars while soft jazz drifted through the restaurant speakers. At one point, Lucas accidentally unfolded one of the stars before it was finished. He froze, staring at the crumpled paper with disappointment. Danielle quietly picked it up, smoothed each crease with patient hands, and smiled. "Sometimes," she said gently, "the second try becomes the favorite one." Lucas watched carefully as she transformed the wrinkled paper into an even brighter star than before. He looked at it for several seconds, then slowly nodded. Vincent felt something tighten inside his chest. Danielle had not been talking only about paper. Without realizing it, she had just given his son permission to believe that broken moments did not have to become broken lives. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, Vincent understood that the greatest lesson Lucas was learning had nothing to do with folded paper. It was learning to trust again, one quiet moment at a time, from someone who had already discovered that kindness grows strongest in hearts that have known loss without allowing it to erase their compassion. One quiet Saturday afternoon, the restaurant was filled with families enjoying long lunches while sunlight reflected across polished windows and neatly arranged tables. Lucas sat beside Danielle at his favorite table near the window, carefully folding another paper animal from a bright blue sheet she had placed in front of him. Vincent remained several feet away, pretending to review documents while secretly watching every small expression on his son's face. What amazed him most was not that Lucas smiled more often now. It was that he no longer seemed afraid of the world around him. He looked up whenever someone laughed nearby. He noticed children playing outside. He even thanked a waiter who refilled his glass of water with a quiet nod. The walls he had built around himself were slowly disappearing, not through pressure, but through patience. Danielle never celebrated these changes. She accepted each one with quiet gratitude, allowing Lucas to move at his own pace. As they folded another paper bird together, Danielle accidentally dropped a small stack of colorful paper onto the floor. Several sheets scattered beneath the table. Before she could bend down, Lucas immediately slid from his chair and began gathering every piece one by one. Danielle smiled warmly. "Thank you, Lucas," she said gently. The little boy froze for a moment after hearing his own name spoken with such simple kindness. Then he carefully placed the papers back into her hands. Danielle looked at him with the same calm expression she had worn from the beginning. "You are very thoughtful." Another long silence followed. Vincent lowered the papers he had been pretending to read. Something inside him sensed that an important moment was approaching. Lucas looked down at the colorful paper bird resting between his hands. His lips moved ever so slightly, almost as though he were practicing words that had remained hidden for far too long. Danielle did not encourage him. She simply waited. Finally, in a voice so soft that only the people closest to the table could hear, Lucas whispered, "Can we make another one?" Time itself seemed to stop. Danielle's smile grew just a little brighter, but she showed no surprise that might frighten him away. "Of course," she answered gently. "I would love to." Lucas nodded and reached for another square of paper. Across the room, Vincent could no longer hide the emotion filling his eyes. Those 4 simple words were the first complete sentence his son had spoken to anyone outside the family since losing his mother. There were no dramatic celebrations. No one applauded. The restaurant continued serving lunch as though the world had not quietly changed forever. Yet for one father, everything had changed. After they finished folding another paper crane, Lucas carefully picked it up and walked toward Vincent. He placed the little bird into his father's hands before doing something even more unexpected. He reached up and wrapped his small arms around Vincent in a gentle hug. Vincent closed his eyes as he embraced his son, holding him with a tenderness he feared he might never experience again. When he finally looked toward Danielle, she had already returned to helping another family with their meals, asking for no recognition and expecting no reward. In that quiet moment, Vincent understood that the greatest gift she had given Lucas was never the paper animals. She had reminded a little boy that the world could still be a safe place, and she had quietly shown a father that healing always begins with someone willing to listen before asking to be heard. The days that followed brought changes so quiet that most people would have overlooked them, but to Vincent they felt nothing short of extraordinary. Lucas no longer hesitated when it was time to leave the house. Instead, he waited by the front door with a folded piece of colorful paper in his hand, already wondering what new shape Danielle might teach him that afternoon. More surprising than anything else, Vincent began changing his own routines as well. Business dinners became family meals. Evening meetings were postponed whenever possible. His assistants noticed the difference, but no one dared ask why the city's most disciplined businessman suddenly seemed determined to protect hours that had once belonged only to work. One afternoon, after Lucas and Danielle had finished folding a collection of tiny paper stars, Vincent approached them with a warm smile instead of remaining at a distance. Lucas looked up at his father, then quietly reached for his hand without hesitation. It was a simple gesture, yet Vincent treasured it more than any business achievement he had ever celebrated. Danielle noticed the moment but respectfully looked away, giving father and son the privacy they deserved. As Lucas wandered toward the dessert display to admire the pastries, Vincent turned to Danielle for the first real conversation they had ever shared. "I have been wanting to thank you," he said sincerely. Danielle smiled with quiet humility. "You do not need to thank me. Lucas has done all the difficult work himself." Vincent gently shook his head. Every expert tried to teach him how to return to the world. You simply welcomed him whenever he was ready. Danielle lowered her eyes for a brief moment before answering. Sometimes people do not need someone to lead them. They only need someone willing to walk beside them. Vincent reflected on those words in silence. They sounded simple, yet they carried a wisdom that could not be learned from expensive books or prestigious degrees alone. A few moments later, Lucas returned carrying 3 paper napkins. Without saying anything, he carefully placed one in front of Danielle, one in front of his father, and kept one for himself. Danielle immediately understood his quiet invitation. Together, the 3 of them began folding paper boats side by side. The afternoon sunlight filled the dining room with a gentle golden glow, while soft piano music drifted through the air. Customers nearby smiled at the peaceful scene without fully understanding why it felt so moving. When all 3 boats were finished, Lucas carefully lined them up across the table. He looked first at Danielle, then at Vincent, before speaking in a voice that was stronger than it had been only days before. "They stay together." Vincent felt his throat tighten as he looked at the little paper boats resting side by side. Danielle smiled gently. "Yes," she answered softly. "They travel farther that way." Lucas looked at his father and smiled. It was no longer the faint, uncertain smile of a frightened child. It was the quiet confidence of someone beginning to believe that he was no longer alone. Vincent realized that healing had reached beyond his son. It had quietly found him as well. For the first time since losing his wife, he no longer felt as though he had to carry every burden by himself. Sitting across from a humble waitress whose greatest strength was her kindness, Vincent discovered that true leadership did not begin with authority. It began with presence, patience, and the courage to share even the quietest moments with the people who needed them most. Autumn slowly settled over the city, bringing crisp mornings and golden leaves that drifted past the restaurant windows. By then, Lucas had become a familiar smile to everyone who worked there. The kitchen staff greeted him by name. The hostess always saved his favorite table near the window whenever possible. Customers who had quietly witnessed his journey over the past several weeks often smiled when they saw him, carefully carrying another folded paper creation in his hands. Yet the greatest change was happening beyond the restaurant walls. Vincent no longer measured success only by completed business deals or expanding investments. His calendar now included afternoons at the park, weekend breakfasts with Lucas, and evenings spent reading storybooks instead of answering endless telephone calls. Every moment with his son felt like time he had been given back. One afternoon, after the lunch crowd had faded and the restaurant had grown peaceful again, Vincent invited Danielle to sit for a few minutes before her next shift began. She hesitated politely, then accepted only after making certain every customer had been served. Vincent placed a neatly sealed envelope on the table between them. "This cannot repay what you have done," he said sincerely. "But I hope it can help you return to school and finish the education you sacrificed." Danielle looked at the envelope without touching it. For several quiet moments, she simply smiled. Finally, she gently pushed it back toward Vincent. "Your kindness means more than you know," she answered softly. "But I cannot accept this." Vincent looked surprised. "You earned far more than what is inside." Danielle slowly shook her head. Lucas never needed someone to rescue him. He needed people who believed he could heal. Watching him smile again has already been a gift I never expected. Vincent remained silent, unsure how to respond. Danielle continued with the same calm honesty that had shaped every conversation she had ever shared. "If you truly wish to thank me, keep doing what you are already doing. Eat dinner with him. Listen when he wants to talk. Stay beside him when he chooses silence. Those moments are worth more than anything inside that envelope." Vincent lowered his eyes, realizing that once again Danielle had quietly redirected his attention toward what mattered most. Just then, Lucas walked over carrying 3 freshly folded paper stars. He handed one to Danielle, one to his father, and slipped the last one into his own pocket with a proud smile. "One for everybody," he said clearly. Danielle smiled with gentle pride, while Vincent felt another wave of gratitude fill his heart. Weeks earlier, hearing even a single sentence had seemed impossible. Now Lucas spoke with growing confidence, not because someone had forced him to, but because someone had patiently waited until he was ready. Before returning to work, Danielle stood and thanked Vincent for the conversation. She left the unopened envelope resting on the table beside him. Vincent watched her walk back into the dining room, greeting every customer with the same warmth she had shown from the very beginning. In that quiet moment, he understood that the rarest kind of generosity was never measured by what a person accepted. It was measured by what they freely gave without expecting anything in return, and Danielle had given his family something that could never be purchased, replaced, or forgotten.